Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. India is dealing with Chinese aggression in Ladakh along the line of actual control. And China is also renaming places in Arunachal Pradesh, an Indian state. Meanwhile, a delegation of US lawmakers led by the House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman McCaul and former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi are meeting the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala. The delegation also includes McCaul, a Republican from Texas. He's the main sponsor of the Tibet Resolve Bill, which was passed on the 12th of June in the House of Representatives. Now, the bill calls on Beijing to resume dialogue with the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, and other Tibetan leaders about how Tibet is to be governed. Let's not forget that China annexed Tibet in 1951, after which the Dalai Lama, the spiritual head of the Tibetan people, fled to India. China calls the Dalai Lama a separatist, and all that the Dalai Lama wants is for greater autonomy for his people and for the protection of the Tibetan way of life. Can the Tibet card in 2024 help India offset pressure along the line of actual control? That's the question we're going to be discussing today. And joining me to discuss this are Tibetologist Claude Arpi, Dr. Rajan Kumar of the JNU, and my colleague Deepak Bhadana in the studio. Mr. Arpi, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you.
I want to start by asking you this about the India-US cooperation on the Tibet question. That's been literally the cornerstone of our strategic cooperation since the 1960s, especially after the 1962 war. How significant is this cooperation in the light of the renewed pressure that China has begun applying after almost 60 years along the LAC, in the middle of which you have a US delegation coming and meeting the Dalai Lama? Break it down for us.
I don't know how significant it is for the boundary issue because, the situation in the US is very different. They are very far away from Beijing.
Yes.
And fortunately, India has a 3,580 kilometers of LAC, and since 4 years in Ladakh, a very tense confrontation. So the situation is different. Now, one good thing in the new law, which has been passed and which is waiting the president's assent, is that it reiterates that Tibet was a free country,
Yes.
so independent country. And this, it says very clearly that it should not be forgotten. And if China keep on his propaganda that Tibet has always been part of China, it should be countered. It's extremely important for India because India's border is Tibet's border.
Yes.
Now, if you take the McCaul line on the eastern sector, that line was agreed to by the Tibetan Prime Minister, Lord Chanchatra, and the Foreign Secretary of India, Sir Henry McMahon, in 1914. And both signatures and seal are on the map. So the map, the boundary, whether in Ladakh or in Sikkim or in central sector, Uttarakhand, Himachal, or even part of Ladakh, is the Indo-Tibet. So when you reiterate that Tibet was an independent country, I think it's a good thing for India. The second part of the law, I don't know how far it can go, asking for negotiation, because as you're aware, China today doesn't listen to any advice, I would say, of anybody. And negotiation with China is not something easy. You have experienced yourself in Ladakh after 20 rounds of talks. Though you have 60,000 or 70,000 troops facing the Chinese People's Liberation Army, already only 3 places have been settled, and Depsang and Demchok have not been settled. So Tibet doesn't have an army, doesn't have any real power. That's what is a power today in this world in which we are living. So that's make it very difficult, because if India is not able to settle Depsang and Demchok, I don't see how Dharamshala is going to settle for what His Holiness called a genuine autonomy.
Right.
And
I'm going to bring in Dr. Rajan Kumar on this. Dr. Kumar, can the Tibet card in 2024 help India offset the pressure along the LAC?
I think no, Sandeep ji. I don't think India can play the way the United States is trying to play at the moment, because India has a very certain definite policy towards Tibet, and there were at least two occasions when, in fact, many of the critics say that was a mistake. 1954, I'm talking of the Panchsheel, and then again when Atal Bihari Vajpayee visited China. So somewhere we made the mistake. I mean, Indian diplomacy. That Tibet is an integral part of China, or Tibet is a part of China. Later on, in some of the documents, we started saying autonomous Tibet, etc. And there is a sense, there is a broader sense that Tibet traditionally, at least from 1912, when the Qing dynasty kind of collapsed and a new regime started, till 1949, Tibet was an independent country, independent state, and even the similar negotiation that was taking place in 1914, then Tibet was being treated as an independent entity. But after that, somehow, we trusted China too much, and Indian diplomacy accepted China as this thing. But at the same time, we have done much more than United States, because because Dalai Lama and we gave the refuge to large number of Tibetan population, numbering about 1 lakh people staying in Dharamshala and different parts of India. But we have a very clear policy that we have allowed those Tibetans to stay in India, but at the same time, they cannot engage in any political activity. And if you see the government's policy, there were many occasions, even in the last 10 years, I can tell you that our government did not actively allow many of the conferences to take place because the government thought that it might give a kind of wrong message to China. So government is very cautious, careful when it comes to the issue of playing Tibet as a card. We have our border issues with China, and we're dealing it separately. We are not trying to link that in any way with the issue of Tibet. So we are not playing that Tibetan card there also when it comes to the border issues with. And we also know that our 3,500 kilometers of border. Most of the borders that we have is with Tibet, Mahon line that you call it. But we are not willing to play a Tibet card. Till now, I can tell you that I do not see any shift in India's policy towards Tibet. This visit of Nancy Pelosi that you were referring to, that indicates that somewhere India is willing to take that kind of step, which earlier it was not willing. But beyond that, India is not doing much. I do not see much of safety in India's policy towards Tibet. And also that, yes, as far as China is concerned, we have clearly shifted in the last few years when we became very active player in Quad, and we're also trying to become, doing this military exercise, etc., with Quad members, which basically, which goes against China. But as far as this Tibetan refugee or Tibetan issue is concerned, we are cautious, we are careful. We are also in a very difficult situation because Dalai Lama's age is a factor. He's about 90 years old, and there is a sense that what happens if he kind of, something happens to him. So that India needs to develop. There is also an issue with related to Tibet. Let me tell you that after 1987, we stopped giving citizenship to the Tibetan refugees who were born after 1987. Before that, we did it, but there was a case, and after that, we stopped giving it. So that population is also in limbo. They don't know what to do. They are stateless people. So those are the issues that we are dealing with Tibet. But yeah, we do not want to politicize at this moment.
Right. We don't want to politicize it at this moment. But Claude, there's that point that the professor raised, which is that the Dalai Lama's advancing years. He's going to turn 89 just next month in July. And then there's the question of the succession. I mean, we all wish the Dalai Lama a very long life. But at some point, this question of who will succeed the Dalai Lama is going to be asked. And the Chinese say that they are not going to be out of this whole equation. They are going to have the right to choose the successor to the Dalai Lama. How important is this succession struggle going to be for the future of the Tibetan people?
I think it's the most important thing because the Dalai Lama is the center of the life of the Tibetan and Tibet since centuries. So whatever happened to Dalai Lama has consequences and implications. Now, India is a secular state. It's mentioned in the constitution. So India will not intervene in the succession of the Dalai Lama directly. But India has very serious concern also by what happened after, because India's borders all the Himalayan belt, whether it's Ladakh or Laos, Spiti, Kinnaur, Sikkim, Arunachal, most of the people are Buddhist and followers of the Dalai Lama. If the Dalai Lama goes to Ladakh, he went the last 2 years during the summer, there's more than 1 lakh of people lining up between the airport in his residence 15 kilometers away in Leh. There's no single political leader, anybody in the world who will have that follower. So this is an important factor that even the Dalai Lama should take into account when he decides for reincarnation. Now, he said last week that he will live up to 110. We all wish that he will live till that age. But it's better to have a plan B and say, okay, that will happen, because India has very serious concerns vis-à-vis its Buddhist population in the north.
Right. Deepak, as as Dr. Rajan Kumar mentioned, that India might be wary of playing the Tibet card for obvious reasons, that you share a contentious boundary with China, the LAC, and you've troops deployed in eyeballing each other. But the US would not be averse to playing a Tibet card. And in fact, this Resolve Tibet Act precisely indicates the fact that they want to get Xi Jinping to focus away from Taiwan and possibly look at Tibet.
I think this is only going to aggravate China all the more.
Yeah.
In the past, the US and Hollywood in particular,
yes.
So they were very vocal in their support for the Dalai Lama. I mean, I recall Richard Gere coming to India and talking about him. As far as India is concerned, India will also get part of the blame. The Chinese are not going to be so discriminatory when it comes to apportioning blame for this. But as far as, say, a tougher line towards China is concerned, I think for the new NDA government, one of their key foreign objectives is to resolve the border issues with China.
Yes.
In this case, it could be a step towards that.
Right.
But there are bigger and better cards that India perhaps can play. And one of the most important of them is the trade card.
Right.
This is something that China is keenly aware of.
Yes.
So let's see, I think, interesting times ahead.
Interesting times ahead, and that quote that's attributed to the Chinese, which is that may you live in interesting times. That is something that's oft repeated in the India-China context. But Dr. Rajan Kumar, Xi Jinping is possibly the only major global leader who hasn't wished Prime Minister Modi on his third term. Right? There seems to be a Cold War. I remember he did that in 2019, but in 2024, of course, much water has flown down the Yangtze. How do you think he's going to see this visit of the US delegation to meet the Dalai Lama at this juncture, when he is facing off against Taiwan, he's got an issue in the South China Sea, and then you have a US Congress, very high profile delegation landing up to meet the Dalai Lama?
I think, there's a very serious diplomacy going on. The fact that India allowed this to happen, and Nancy Pelosi is a known provocateur, let me tell you. She, if you remember, just a few months back, she was in Taiwan, and Taiwan was surrounded by the Chinese army from different sides. And she went despite requests from many of the US policymakers not to visit, but she was speaker and she had the right to go, so she decided to go. In our case, we have to be careful. If we have to fight with China, we should be fighting in our own terms, and we did that in the Galwan crisis, and the entire world knows about it. But we should not be provoked by any third country. We should not become the part of the larger US game, where what you rightly pointed out, that this might be a greater US strategy to shift the focus away a bit from Taiwan. and that may be dangerous for India and a number of other countries in the region. So we have to be careful. We have to be very diplomatic. Yes, we as a democracy, we do not, we cannot stop anybody from meeting other people, and we treat Dalai Lama as a very important spiritual leader. We only request the Tibetan community not to participate politically in India. Outside, they are free to do whatever they want to do. But yes, we should not be the kind of, we should not become the Ukraine for the United States, if I can use the term in another way. So yes, and we have stood very firmly against China, and our resources are enough. And even during the China conflict, we said very clearly to both Russia and United States that we do not want any third party, either mediation or support. So we are very clear that, and we are sufficient, we are capable to deal with China, but we should not become a part of this US grand strategy where it would like to engage other countries against China. And we have to be extremely careful about it. But coming to your question that how China would treat it, so China would treat this visit as an act of hostility. It would create some kind of tension again between India and China. But India is not worried about that, and Prime Minister Modi is not expecting any kind of legitimacy from Xi Jinping, who has not greeted, as you said. Doesn't really matter. India is a democracy and is a vibrant democracy, as this election has proven again. So we should not be worried about what China is thinking. We should also not be worried about any kind of legitimacy coming from China, because China is not. The Xi Jinping can remain in power forever, but in India, in a democracy, we cannot allow that kind of situation to happen. And we do not appreciate that kind of leadership, nor do we expect some kind of legitimacy from that kind of authoritarian
Right,
leadership.
absolutely. Yeah, very important points there, Dr. Kumar. And Deepak, while we're talking about the visit of the US Congress delegation to meet the Dalai Lama, you have President Putin in North Korea at this very moment. So as Dr. Rajan Kumar mentioned, there's some serious diplomacy at work across the globe. Old relationships are being revived, old grand strategies are being revived. And of course, the point that he made is spot on, the fact that it is for India to tread that very fine line between our interests and what the US interests are in this case, and certainly avoid being played by any other country, because we, at the end of the day, have our own battles to fight. But thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on this fascinating discussion of US delegation meeting the Dalai Lama precisely at the time when China is eyeballing Taiwan across the Taiwan Straits. Thank you very much, Dr. Rajan Kumar, my friend Claude Arpi, and my colleague Deepak Bhadana at News9 Plus studio.